And you can see, like, you can relate all this to your relationship with God, right? Like, if I'm not spending time talking to him, if I'm not revealing my heart, if I'm not listening to his heart, if I'm not spending time in his presence, all those things, then my relationship with God is going to be affected. It's the same thing as same way as any other relationship. So that led me to this passage, and this is it's a really famous passage, and it's one I think that is really deep, and I'll tell you, I've read it probably 20 times at least through this week, and I still sometimes feel like I don't know if I get it. Like, I don't know if I get all that it's saying here. And so I thought that would be a good opportunity to teach it. Because one of the best ways to learn something is to tell other people about it. Did you know that? It's true. But seriously, I think this is a really, really rich text. And this is in the middle of another one of Jesus's. Like, you're probably familiar with the Sermon on the Mount, right? This is the kind of the second longest series of Jesus's talks in a row. And so he's talking in John 15. And some of you have been in church for a while. You've heard about the vine and the branches. That's the passage we're going to read together this morning. And what I like to do with this is I want to read the whole thing because I want you to get the whole picture. And then we're going to talk about, there's some individual verses that I've highlighted as we read through it that I want to go back to. But I want you to just like lock in here for a second and really think about what he's saying here. Okay, this is really, I think, an important passage where he's trying to communicate. He's getting ready to go to the cross here. He's trying to communicate what life should be like when you follow Jesus. Okay, so here he goes. He says, will you follow me, Eden? I'm going to read from my Bible. He says, I am the vine and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean, though, because of the word I've spoken to you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. So anybody in here who's a teacher, you know that people learn by repetition. So just watch the themes that he just keeps saying, okay? I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not remain in me, he is like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be given to you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you obey my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have obeyed my Father's commands, and I remain in his love. I've told you all of this so that my joy may be in you, and your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that he lays down his life for his friends. And you are my friends if you do what I command. Look, I no longer call you servants because the servant doesn't know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends, for everything I've learned from the Father I've made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to go and bear fruit that will last. Then the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. This is my command. Love each other. And again, on surface level, that remain in me and I'll remain in you, right? This kind of feels like, yeah, it's pretty simple. But at the same time, sometimes I try to read the Bible and be like, okay, but how does that work? What does that look like in my life? And I've read it and read it and read it and read it. And I feel like this is like thick. It's like deep. It's like something that you should read for the rest of your life. Because I want to have this kind of relationship with Jesus where I remain in him and he remains in me and my life connects to his and I'm bearing much fruit and I'm following his word and his word is dwelling in me. So I want to boil this down into kind of 3 steps that I see. And what I want to say is, not that. What I want to say is this: the person you've always wanted to be. Okay, so as you read this and he talks about bearing much fruit, the person you've always wanted to be is found by remaining in Jesus. So think about what you've always wanted to be, who you've always wanted to be. I really, one of the things that I want to be is I want to be able to handle stress and or crisis and pressure with tons of peace and grace. I don't want to get flustered. I don't want to get angry. I don't want to get anxious. I want to be able to just handle it. Stuff's going to come our way, right? And I want to be one of those people who's just like, okay, so let's roll with that. Let's find the next solution. Let's take the next step. I want to be someone who's got wisdom that like is like coming out of my pores, right? Like if you sit down and we talk about life, I want to have those like wisdom statements I say to you that you are like, wow, I really needed to hear that. I want to have wisdom when it comes to decisions in my life, that I make good decisions. Right? This is the kind of person I want to be. I want to be selfless. I want to be naturally generous. Like, I don't want to have to work at it. I just want to be a generous person. Do you want to be like a generous person? Like someone, people are around and they're like, that person is just generous with their time. They're generous with their money. They're generous with their stuff. Like, that's just a generous person. That's not who I am. None of these things are who I am naturally. I am anxious. I get worried. I get stressed. I am not generous. I am selfish. But the person I want to be, the person I've always wanted to be, the kind of husband I want to be, the kind of father I want to be, the kind of friend I want to be, I'm not going to get there by white knuckling it through life. You know what I mean? I'm not going to get there by my sheer determination and effort. Something's changing inside of me the longer I remain in Jesus. And that's what this passage is about. It's an invitation from God to remain in him and then see your life become what you always hoped you would be. To remain in him and watch God's grace work effectively in you and you become who God's called you to be. So Dallas Willard says this. If you're not familiar with Dallas Willard, he's one of the foremost philosophical, theological thinkers of our kind of the generation before me. And he said, a disciple is a person who's decided that the most important thing in their life is to learn how to do what Jesus said to do. I want to learn how to do what Jesus said to do. I want that to be the most important thing in my life. So 3 points. First, the goal from this passage is what I'm going to call union with God. And that kind of sounds weird. It might be different than how you've heard it before. You might call it relationship. But remain in me and I will remain in you. This is this sense of I am choosing to put God first in everything in my life. Now, this is really frustrating because I actually have a thing that I need two hands to do here. Okay, we will figure it out. Wait, what? It works now? Oh, you are messing with me. Okay. Here we go. Look, if it's your first time, we really are pretty professional. Okay. All right. This is the best that I could do. I was trying to think of the best way to do this. So I printed out some images, and these represent parts of my life. Anxiety. Okay? So I've got my anxiety. I've got money. Yeah? I have some. You've got money. This was going to be like relationships. Some of these are going to have a little bit of a stretch. My phone, or like content, what I look at, what I partake, what I read, what I watch. My thought life. Can you see back there? Okay, good. Whew. All right, that says past, now, and future. What I was trying to capture here was my future and my past. Like, okay? Like the things in my past, the things in my future. There's more of these than I thought. I printed that one twice. Pain in my past, right? Heartache, frustration. Your time, right? It's a cute little alarm clock. Oh, I forgot what that was. It's kind of weird. Decisions, okay? Decisions. Which way am I going to go? There's so many of these. All right, work. Yeah, I did this at like midnight last night. So, all right, that's kind of the same. I mean, okay, marriage. Yeah, and kids. Those go together sometimes. All right, so what do I do with this in my life? So here's what's supposed to happen. This is Jesus, okay? I'm supposed to remain in Jesus, right? I'm supposed to have all that I am remain in Jesus. But this is what I do. This is what I did this week, okay? So we had something kind of stressful happen in our house, not the sickness, something else. And so I found myself taking my anxiety away from Jesus and holding it for myself. And I know not to do that. Don't you know how not to do that? Yeah. And I wasn't remaining in him. And I had to talk through it, and I had to spend some time in prayer. And I had to say, God, I know that like what I believe is that you make all things good for those who are called according to your purpose. So even though this is bad, even though this is a struggle that's happening right now, I know that you're not going to leave me alone in this. And I know, like, I don't need to be anxious. I know that you care for me more than the birds of the air and the lilies of the field, right? And yet, like another quote I didn't put up, Dallas Willard says that, what you believe isn't what you believe. It's how you live. It's how you act like what you believe. And so I was like not remaining in him. I was pulling it to myself. See, a lot of times what we do actually is, and this is a reverse, is we'll say, okay, God, I will trust you. I'll trust you with my decisions and my work and my kids, but anything internal, my anxiety, my thought life, I'm just going to keep that to myself. And we start to segment out. Or we think faith is its own thing. And so we have faith over here, but we still run our lives like this. And so this is like Sunday morning, the other 6 days of the week, right? Some of us do that too. And some of that is the fault of, just to be honest, churches you grew up in that acted like this is enough. And see, one of the things we talk about here a lot, and I'm going to keep talking about it because I think it's important, is that we're not trying to just, at City Light, we're not trying to, and I believe the Bible and Jesus aren't trying to just create believers, okay? I read this thing this week that like believers is used like 4 or 5 times in the Bible. Disciples is used like a lot more. I don't remember the number. I don't want to exaggerate because preachers do that a lot, but a lot more. We're not called to just be believers. Believing starts it. We're called to be disciples, and a disciple is someone whose life is fully formed. Their whole life is formed around what does it mean to follow Jesus? So our hope isn't just like, hey, check the box of going Sunday morning. I hope you believe in Jesus so that when you die, you go to heaven. Man, I'm so glad. Let's move on to the next person. My hope is that we're all cultivating a life of everything being grounded and rooted and dependent upon and sustained by our faith in Jesus. That faith isn't one of the things about us, that it is the only thing about us and everything else fits into it. Does that make sense? And so I find myself doing this. Like there are times when you like grab your money, right? And you're like, okay, and you're just like, maybe he won't notice, You're like, have you ever felt that? Like, have you ever felt like God put something on your heart to be generous, to give something sacrificially to someone? And you're like, oh God, my money remains in you. You might even tithe, and that's great. But then God calls you to be generous, and you're like, well, it usually remains in you. All right. And over and over and over again, we do that. We take stuff away, right? Like, we know how we're supposed to act in our marriage, but there are times when we're just like, I want to be selfish. And we just like get further and further away. And so it's the stupidest illustration I've ever done. But you might remember it because of how stupid it is. See, it's like reverse psychology. But this is what it means to remain in Christ. Like, am I making a conscious effort to keep everything that I am, all that makes me me, in him at all times? Remain in me, and I will remain in you. Are you giving him everything about you? Are you giving him everything? Have you taken your hands off? And so this leads us to the second thing, which I think is how we get there. The way to that goal is through surrender. Or another word for surrender that's really popular is obedience. Okay? Jesus, now you can't get away from this in this passage. And just like go read it. If you keep my commands, you will remain in me. Here's what we want it to say. If you remain in me, you will keep my commands. In fact, when I was younger, I went to, say how to say this. A lot of the people that I related to had a very like works-oriented faith. And so I was always battling this conception that you had to be good in order to earn God's love. And so I would often talk about this verse, and I would try to flip it and talk about, well, if you love him, then it's love comes first. And yes, I believe that. Like you do love God and he loves you and all that good stuff. But the reality is when you read this, the order is, if you keep my commands, you will remain in me, just as I've kept my Father's commands. There's another part that says, if my words remain in you, If my words remain in you, then you will remain in me. There's something about obeying God that allows us to have the first goal, to remain in him. There's something about choosing to obey God. And I'm not just saying like, don't do bad stuff, right? Like that's the easy way. But I'm saying surrender, like to what God is calling you to do in your life. Surrender to God in all areas of my life. I think this is what he's getting at. See, Jesus lived a perfectly surrendered life to God the Father. And so because he was fully surrendered to God the Father, he had perfect union with God. And he had the same desires, the same goals, because they were walking as one. And that's what God is wanting for us. He's wanting us to have that same oneness with God, to be not so different from God and always trying to like measure up, but they were closer and closer to becoming more and more like him. And the way to get there is through surrender. And this is something we will practice the rest of our lives. It's the practice of surrendering our will and giving it up to the will of God. And I think a couple of ways we can do that. Number one is to have a big yes in our heart, right? When God calls us to something that we are always on the edge of yes towards God. Yes, God, I will go pray for that person even though it scares me. Yes, God, I will go sacrificially give to that person even though I'm worried about money right now. Yes, God, I will go give my time even though it's been busy lately. Yes, God, I will go volunteer for that thing even though I like my Sunday mornings and I don't want to come early to church. You know, I'm just random things. No. Yes, God, I will go help that person who's in need. Yes, God. I mean, it might be other things like I will talk to my friend about Jesus. You know, I will confront that person who hurt my feelings because the Bible tells me to do that. I will stand up for someone who's being bullied or who's being persecuted, even though other people might, you know, judge me in a different way. Like I will stand up for what I think the Bible teaches and live my life a certain way, even though other people might look at me strangely. Right? I mean, it's your whole life. It's every age. Like, will you have a big yes? I think that's just as important, if not more important, than having a big no. We do have to have a big no too, right? I mean, I have been told I have a big nose, so it comes easy to me. Lots of big no's. But if you have a big no, like I won't watch stuff like that. Like I know most of the world watches stuff like that, but I'm a follower of Jesus. I want to remain in him. If you obey what I say, you will remain in me. How can I remain in him if I'm watching stuff that I know is pulling my heart in a corrupt direction? And I'm not going to specifically put anything on you because I think some of that's personal. You got to figure out what it is for you, right? But like, are you filtering what you consume through the lens of what the Lord wants for you in your life? What you watch, what you read, what you partake in, what you do on social media, like that, all of that. Like we're talking about having a master in your life, right? The word Lord is kind of a weird word for us these days, but to follow Jesus is to make him in charge of everything. I was teaching this, I was teaching soccer the other day, and this kid was trying to learn how to shoot the ball, and we were working on a very specific shot. Okay, this is very nerdy. Okay, if you're a soccer person, but it's worth the point. So we were working on dribbling on one side of the goal and shooting across to the other side, which is like a basic concept. You shoot far post. Okay, but you get people in a game and they don't do it, and it drives you crazy. And so I decided we're going to just do it by repetition so that when you get in a game, it's the only thing you think about. Maybe it'll work, probably not. So this girl, every time she would come up and she would kick the ball and it would go straight. And I was like, are you aiming far post? And she said, yes. She'd come in and kick the ball and it would go straight. I was like, okay. So then I just went and watched her form a few times, and what she was hitting the ball completely wrong. She was hitting under the ball, and so it was going, and so she had to surrender her will to me. Okay, it sounds kind of weird, but I said, listen, I'm going to show you how to do it. So I slowed it all down, and I stood her there and put the ball next to her foot, and I said, you have to hit it here, and when you hit it here, it will go there. Trust me, I know better than you, right? She walked up to it, and it's like, we're going to get rid of the running. We're just going to take one step. She goes, far post, side netting. She was like, I was like, yeah. right? And it's this, that's what it's like following God. It's like, okay, stop trying to do the same thing your way over and over again. Shank, 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 right? Surrender to God. If God is calling you to live your life differently, will you surrender? And some of the things, I mean, honest, some of the things that God calls us to do is not easy. He calls us to sacrificially give of our finances. He calls us to love people who bother us, right? He calls us to be committed to people who hurt our feelings. He calls us to pray for our enemies. Some of following God is going to be difficult. You're going to look different, you know? Like if you're a teenager following God, you're going to look different. Right? If you're going to public school and you're in high school, everyone's having sex. It's just happening. Like if you're trying to follow Jesus in high school, you're like one of the only people in your friend group who hasn't had sex. You're one of the only people in your friend group who's not getting drunk on the weekends. And it's just like a reality. Are you going to live that way? Are you going to be okay not being invited to certain parties? Are you going to be okay being the only one at the party who doesn't drink? Are you going to be okay when people are talking about stuff and you have to leave the room because you don't want to be part of that? And it doesn't change when you become an adult, does it? Right? Like in your workplace, are you going to live differently? Are you going to be okay with being an adult who isn't mean to people, who doesn't step on other people's necks to get ahead, right? Who doesn't gossip behind people's backs? Are you going to be okay being different? And I think it's a challenge for us, and it's an invitation. Remain in me, but it's not free. Like it costs us something. Like I wish it was different, but like part of following Jesus is obeying his word. And what I want to say is like there's so much freedom that comes in that. I was texting with some friends of mine last night when I was thinking about surrender. So I want you to hear this. If you obey my commands, you will remain in me. And remaining in Jesus is the goal, right? Being in him is what we want. We want our lives to be. So how do I remain in him? The key is right there. Obey his commands. I have really good friends of mine, Sarah and Jacob Ultimus. Some of you know them. I asked their permission to share this. When we planted City Light, I was hoping that they would come with us. But with all of our friends and family, we said, you don't have to come with us. You need to listen to God, right? There's no, we're not going to have any hurt feelings. And they felt the Lord say no, that they were supposed to stay at the church that we came from. And they didn't come with us. And it was really hard for me. I really, I said that I wouldn't be mad at them. No, I wasn't mad at them. I was disappointed. I love them. Right? I wanted them to be part of this adventure together. I knew how awesome this was going to be. And they're super gifted and talented. We've had them here to lead worship since. Some of you have met them. But one of the reasons that later they found out that God asked them not to come with us is because another opportunity came like 2 years, 3 years later, where God began to speak to them about moving to Maine. And they had no idea, they had no reason to move to Maine, but they moved to Maine. And then once they were in Maine, God began to speak to them about volunteering at the youth group at this church. And now they are ministering to like 30, 40, 50 kids. And God has been using them for the last, 3 years in the lives of these teenagers where they had no one to do this. And the youth group grew by like 30 kids. These kids are going through difficult things. And it's all because they had a big yes to God in their heart, that they were willing to surrender what they wanted for what God was calling them to do. They remained in Christ. And what has come of that is the third step, which is fruitfulness. So if the goal is union with God, the way to get there is surrender, and then the result of union with God is fruitfulness. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. And apart from me, you can do nothing. Not you can do nothing, right? But you can do nothing of eternal significance because you're doing it in your own power. What we're talking about is bearing fruit, remember what I said, becoming the person you always wanted to be starts with remaining in him. This is the fruitfulness that you can have. And what happens is like, we're not supposed to just like work hard to be a good person. It's supposed to come out of being with Jesus. Dallas Willard, again, he says, in spiritual formation, we are aiming at a character in life that is so shaped that the deeds of Christ, listen, routinely and easily come from what is inside. See, this union with God that we're looking for, it's kind of like a marriage. And Paul talks about marriage, and he says marriage is, talks about marriage, and he says it's a sign for what believers and Jesus are like, that we're supposed to become one with God. The church and Jesus. It's like a marriage was a sign as to what that's supposed to look like. So think about that. I've been married to Mandy for 27? Coming up on 27. Maybe. All right. Somewhere between 25 and 30 years. Okay? And over the years, I've become like her. More attractive, funnier. No. Like just a couple of examples, but because we are one, right? The Bible says that when you get married, you become one, and in more ways than one, right? So she is, when we first got married and her whole life, she's just super, super generous. She hates when I talk about this, but she's super generous. And she has this ability to like know what people need when they need it and to offer it in that time. And I've never been great at that. I'm very compassionate. I think I'm a compassionate person, but I've never had that kind of second nature. And so being around her, I have become more like, I've started to think like Mandy thinks. And I will actually and intuit in situations where people need something. And it's not who I am naturally, but I'm becoming more like her. Another way, when I was in my teens and 20s, I just want to be out doing stuff. I am the extrovert of extroverts. And I could spend all weekend at a conference with people, like just 24/7 people. I could come home, have a glass of water, and be like, what are we doing tonight? You know, like, let's go. Let's get some friends together. Let's have people to our house. Let's go out for dinner. Let's go see a movie. Like, I just don't run out of that. And I love doing stuff. And I've never been good at like resting. And Mandy has made me into someone who like, I'll be out with people and I'll be like, wonder when we're going home. I'm kind of looking forward to my couch and my bowl of cereal and just chilling. Right? Like I travel. I love traveling, but there's a little bit of me when I travel and I'm like, this is going to be so cool when I go home. You know, like I've become like a homebody. And I think there's things of that are good. She's grounded me. And I would hope that I've changed you in some ways too. I've made you sloppier, messier. No, more selfish. And the same thing, it needs to be and will be true with God. Like things that were at first a surrender eventually becomes second nature. Okay? When I was first starting to learn to pray for people, it was terrifying. And I had to go out on a limb. I felt like I was stepping out on a limb every time that I said, "Can I pray for you?" Now, it is second nature for me. I don't even think about it. I was praying this Thursday or Friday, I was praying, and God brought this person to my mind. And I just was like, began to pray for them. And then what I usually do is text them. And this person's not a Christian. And, I was wrestling a little bit with like, is this, how do I word this to make it not feel weird? But I wanted them to know like, hey, I'm praying for you. And I don't know how it hit them and, whatever. But like, that's not my responsibility. Like it's just second nature. Like if you're talking to me and you're kind of going through a hard time, I'll just be like, hey, can I just pray for you right now? And I don't have to work up any courage. It's like for you, for like we're all different, right? There's things I do have to work up courage for, but that for me is just second nature now. It's like I've become like Jesus in that small little area of my life, right? You've probably seen that in your life too. The more that you follow Jesus and you surrender, the more you surrender, eventually those things, like if you have a sin issue in your life and you faithfully surrender it to God and you ask forgiveness and you might fail occasionally, but you keep surrendering, eventually it's going to lose power in your life. And then there's going to be a day when you're not even going to think about it. It's going to become second nature. If you are like hoping to be more generous and every time you give like $5 to someone, it's a huge sacrifice because, I don't know, you were raised to be really frugal and it's really important to save because you never know when that day is going to come where you're going to need that money. So giving any money away just feels really irresponsible, but you're starting to like step out and be generous. There will come a day where being generous will just come second nature to us. This is it. When you become, this is the union with God. It's like I'm like this and God's like this, but the longer I follow him, this is what's supposed to happen. Like you're supposed to become like Christ. Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? That's what he's talking about. Remain in me and I will remain in you. Make the choice to consistently remain in me, to stop taking stuff away, keep it remaining in me, and I will remain in you, and you will become like me, and then you will be able to bear fruit. So I think bearing fruit, we read, like, for instance, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and we're like, oh, it's a to-do list. I got to write it down. I got to be loving. I got to be patient. And I think maybe it's more like I have to remain with Jesus, and out of that will begin to grow love. The more I follow him, the more I submit to him, the more I surrender to him and obey his word, I'm going to become more patient. I'm going to become more loving. I'm going to become more kind. So I read this and I think there's something like deep here that's an invitation to the person that you've always wanted to be, the person that you've always wanted to be. And it's not going to come necessary. I mean, it's going to take effort, right? That's a whole other teaching. But what I'm talking about is making the choice to stay fully surrendered to God in every area of your life. So the question today is there anything in your life that you are holding on to right now? Is there anything that isn't remaining in God? His invitation to remain in him. Is there anything that you know that you're not surrendering to the will of God? That you know for instance, what the Bible says about something and you are choosing to do it differently, right? Or there's an area in your life that you're not living in outright like disobedience, but you're not trusting him with it. Or there's a relationship in your life that you know God's telling you something about and you don't want to hear it. You know? Or there's a painful thing that you know you should deal with somebody, but it's easier to ignore it and just sweep it under the carpet. You know? Or there's something God's been calling you to. There's a new opportunity. There's a risk that you've been needing to take. And it's just, honestly, it's easier not to take risks. Because you know why? You won't fail. And failure sucks. No one likes to fail. But, one of our goals here at City Light is if we're not failing, we're probably not living with enough faith. We're not taking enough risks. We need to take risks together. Try stuff, You never know what's on the other side of failure when you're risking for Jesus. And sometimes that very thing is going to be what changes your life. And so I just think it's an invitation. Like, if I were to say, like, okay, I think about teachings and I would say this is like a mature, a mature challenged teaching. Right? There's some teachings that are like easier to follow and some I think are harder to follow. And this is what I would say is like, this is where we're headed, right? Like as followers of Jesus, that's why when I read this, and I've been following Jesus for like 4 decades. When I read this passage, I still am like, ugh. Like I want to take it and like, so I still don't get it totally. I want to learn how to be. And then you hear people who are like older in the faith, you hear them talking and you're like, yeah, that's it. They got it. Right? You know what I'm saying? I just think this is how we get there. And I want to encourage you. Are you like, I was listening to some 12-step program stuff this week. Take a ruthless, what is that? A ruthless self-inventory, something like that. Think about your relationship with God. Where are you in your relationship with God? Are you fully remaining in him? Because I want to just encourage you that God has more for you. Worship team, you can come up. 2 things I feel led to pray for. And we might have some other prayer requests too, but what we do at the end is we do 2 songs if you haven't been here before, and we offer prayer in the back. So we have some people who will pray for you in the back. I want to pray for those of you who are tired because you feel like you've been trying to remain in God and it has been a lot of work and you just feel a little discouraged. And if that's you today, I want you to just know that God sees you, that he hears you. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make you a bad Christian. It can be. Like the Bible over and over and over again in the New Testament talks about our need for endurance. Paul says it all the time. You have need of endurance because the faith journey is not easy. And so if you're feeling discouraged in your faith journey, if you're feeling like I've been trying and I'm worn down, I would encourage you to go back there and get some prayer. Second, I think that you could get prayer for those who you feel like I just keep taking things back into my own hands. I just keep pulling it away from God. And if you're feeling, what I would say you're probably feeling is the conviction of the Holy Spirit. And, I don't always do teachings that have a lot of conviction in them, but this conviction is good. conviction of the Holy Spirit is something that leads you to life. And so if you're feeling convicted today, if you're feeling like God, and what it feels like to me often is God like putting his finger on something in my life or like shining a spotlight on an area that I'm trying to keep hidden. If you feel like a little bit of that, maybe you could get prayer for that. And I know that's like a step of faith. If you don't feel like getting prayer from a stranger, maybe tell someone you trust. But listen, it's way too easy to hear a teaching and feel some conviction and go home and be like, wasn't that big a deal. Out yourself. Okay? Tell somebody to keep you accountable because we all have stuff that we need to work on. Amen? Okay.